Let's go back to 1476 once more. After the disastrous defeat, or rather flight from the battle near Rançon on the 2nd of March 1476, Charles the Bold went to hideout in Nozeroy to reconsider his options. The Duke of Burgundy took off from his camp north of Rançon with a small group of men and arrived in Nozeroy on the 3rd of March. The distance between Rançon and Nozeroy is about 60 to 70 kilometers, depending on the route you take. This was quite a large distance to cover in one day at a time, so my guess is he spent the night in Junior, or maybe he rode through the night. I still have to look into that. Nozeroy in those days, still named Nozeroy, is located in the Jura in the Franche-Comté. Despite its very modest dimensions, the little town belonged to one of the most illustrious families, the Princes of Orange. So when Charles the Bold took refuge there, it was in the sumptuous castle of his close allies, the Chalon family. Let's do a tour. The town is really tiny, barely more than a handful of streets. We arrived in the afternoon last September and parked beside the impressive clock tower, one of the town's two surviving medieval gates. We had a stopover in Nozeroy because travel guides recommended it as a beautiful medieval town with amenities, and more importantly, we stopped there because it had served as one of Charles the Bold's hiding places during his Swiss campaign. We had just finished a fairly strenuous hike to the source of the Ain River and were hoping to have lunch in town, but that plan went awry quite quickly. There was nothing to eat because it was lunchtime off-season. By the way, I've posted a video on my other channel featuring several hikes to waterfalls in this region. Along the main street you'll notice flags in the color of the House of Chalon and now those of the town, yellow and red. The town has added a tree and a bear in their coat of arms, with the bear referring to their former enemies, the Swiss. After a very short walk along the main street, we arrived at the town square. One street further stands the collegiate church of Saint-Antoine, founded by Jean III of Chalon-Arlay. Unfortunately, the church was closed, so we couldn't visit the interior. If you stand with the church behind you and take the path to the left, you'll almost immediately reach the first remains of the chateau of the House of Chalon, the Pearl of the Jura. We could only take a look from outside, as it does not seem to be open to the public. The site occupies the opposite end of the town inside the medieval walls on top of a hill. The original castle dated back to the 13th century, but was later rebuilt by Louis de Chalon into a luxurious residence. The castle was built in a square layout and defended by 8 tall towers. The largest was roofed with lead and was named the Lead Tower or Tour de Plomb. In this tower the prince kept the family treasure. The other towers were covered with lava, traditional limestone roofing slabs, while the remaining buildings had tiled roofs. The main entrance was on the north side, with the chapel on the eastern side of the complex. The castle's rooms were decorated with fine textiles and tapestries. The surrounding forests were rich in game, making it one of the favorite residences of the Princes of Orange. By 1780 the castle had already fallen largely into ruins. The Lead Tower had collapsed a few years earlier. Between 1780 and 1785 it was abandoned and stripped of its furnishings, and later, especially after devastating fires swept through the town in 1815, the townspeople reused the stones of the castle to rebuild their homes. Nowadays the ruins of the castle are being restored. Charles the Bold was not the only famous guest to stay here. His father Philip the Good had already visited the castle together with his wife Isabella of Portugal in 1442 for the wedding of Guillaume de Chalon and Catherine of Brittany. In 1453 the Dauphin Louis, later King Louis XI of France, spent several days here after fleeing from his father and before continuing north to the court of the Duke of Burgundy. Jean IV of Chalon, Prince of Orange, was born at Nozeroy Castle around 1444. That is particularly interesting for me because Jean IV later supported Jean Rollin's candidacy for the bishopric of Autun, Argent, which I have mentioned many times before. Jean de Chalon even called him his cousin. In March 1476, Charles the Bold came knocking at the castle gates. He stayed there for a week, reflecting on his next move and preparing new plans. He left on the 9th of March, heading towards an even greater disaster. The castle also housed an interesting library, assembled by the Princes of Chalon and Philiberto of Luxembourg, the wife of Jean IV. In 1553, for example, its collection contained about 120 books, including illuminated manuscript and some printed books. One of the castle's most famous residents was Philibert de Chalon. He was the son of Jean IV and Philiberto of Luxembourg, previously mentioned. He was named after his mother. Although he was not born here, but in Lons-le-Saunier, because his father lay dying there, Philibert spent much of his childhood at Nozeroy, playing with the local children. At the age of 17, he organized a famous pas d'armes around the castle. More than 100 noblemen and about 1,000 soldiers gathered in the town. For 4 days, apart from Christmas Day itself, they held a tournament on an esplanade beside the castle. On the 1st and 2nd January 1520, a spectacular mock battle took place, the attack and defense of the Bastion, a small temporary fortress built especially for the occasion in the valley below the castle. The Bastion was surrounded by ditches and even equipped with a drawbridge and artillery. Philibert and his men defended the Bastion while the Lord of Montferrand and a force of around 1,000 armed men launched the assault. Several of the participants were injured during the fighting. In the end, Philibert and his party emerged victorious. The festivities concluded with one final joust held in the castle's subterranean hall. Sadly, Philibert was killed at the age of 28 by artillery fire during the siege of Firenze in 1530. As we explored the park surrounding the castle ruins, we came across a group of school children holding a race, so I had to limit filming there somewhat. Farther north, we'll find the Old Gate, one of the town's original 3 gates, where the slots of the medieval drawbridge can still be seen. In case you're interested, the building on the left is the Séminaire, a large school building which is currently for sale for 280,000 euros, including a chapel. But it seems like a lot of work to make it habitable. So this is a very short tour, but then it's a very small town. The next visit will cover an even smaller, bold location, but an important one. So see you next time perhaps.